So if it's paid advertising, then you really need to limit the number of people who are entitled to that credit. And what about the size? I mean, the credits, you have no idea how much time we spend negotiating credits. What you want to do is make sure that the credit you give the talent, no matter how successful they are, that credit is not bigger than the title of the movie in the opening credits or in your advertising. It would dwarf the title of your film if your actors have a bigger profile than your title. And only the most important elements will get a single card, otherwise it's a shared card. So a producer really needs to understand credit, and where you don't have a lot of money, you'll be surprised how often people will want a credit. Even someone who's, on occasion, you'll have a writer, and they want to get a supervising or consulting producer credit because they just feel like, well, it's another opportunity to get my name out there and to maybe derive some credit, maybe derive some compensation from that and ask for it. So be prepared. From your experience, you already know that credit is a hotly contested issue, and but it comes in handy if you don't have a lot of money. Credit is easier to give. If you're talent, you want to make sure that your credit is at the top, and that's also a very competitive item. If you're the first credit, if you're the most important credit, you have the greatest profile, and oftentimes producers will put the credits in alphabetical order if it's just an ensemble. And sometimes they leave the most important credit at the end, with an "and" credit, not at the end of the film, but at the end of the opening credits. It's something that has to be discussed. Perhaps the most important deal point on the C card is approvals. If you're a producer, you really need to zealously guard and approval rights. You don't want a scenario where you have an actor who's asked for a final cut, wants to see their performance before you are permitted to go out and sell the film to a distributor. One of the famous disputes that you will see is a director that wants final cut. And that can be a very onerous burden on a production. It could take a lot of time and money. So if you're a producer and you are a fiduciary and your investors are looking to you to guard their investment, I think you really want to be very careful before you give anybody final cut. You want final cut. And if your investors know that you don't have final cut, then they're really at risk. The cut you make will be the one that most likely is appropriate for exploitation, for distribution. But if you're the director and you have a certain creative muscle you want to exercise, you want everyone to see your signature vision, you may not care as much about the commercial elements and whether or not it gets mainstream distribution. So that's something that you really need to be very careful about if you're a producer. Other approvals relate to the screenplay. If you are the producer, you may want to amend that. You may want to revise that screenplay because what was given to you may not be what exactly you're looking for. So you really want the right to approve it. So you'll give notes back to the writer, and the writer will maybe do a redraft or a polish. But it's not the job isn't done, the final payment should not be made until the writer has revised the draft to reflect your notes, and it has to be your approval, not the writer's approval. Please pay special attention to that. So the R on the C card is rights acquired. That's really the scope of rights that you need to acquire in order to exploit your project. If you're the rights holder, you want to grant a very narrow set of rights. If you're a producer, this is a common classic tension. If you're the producer, you want the broadest amount of rights. You want the right to not only make a film, but the right to create a derivative work. Maybe it's a sequel, maybe it's a prequel, maybe it's an ancillary work, like a television series, or maybe a spin-off. If you are a rights holder and you want to reserve the rights, maybe it's a great screenplay and you're thinking about adapting it into a novel. That's a very common reserved right. You're a writer, you want to give as few rights as possible. If they only have a little bit, if you're only getting a little bit of money, and you have the right to push back on the broad scope of rights that they're requesting. But if you're the producer, more often than not, you really want a broad scope of rights, but be prepared to pay for it. The compensation for those rights will very much depend on a number of factors: the genre, the success of the author, how well that book is done if you're acquiring the rights to an underlying book. If that author had another project that was very successful, that's going to raise the profile, the value of that book. So again, that's part of the tension in the rights acquired, and of course that directly relates to compensation too. Please be careful to acquire those rights with an appropriate agreement before you go out and take money from investors, and before you go out and try and secure distribution. Distributors will be very careful before they accept your film. They will want to look at the chain of title. You guys know what a chain of title is, right? That speaks to the ownership, just as with real estate. It speaks to the ownership of the property from inception. If you cannot demonstrate the ownership from inception, you will not get distribution for your project. So putting those ducks in a row at the very beginning as opposed to the end is so important. And if you're out there raising money, purporting to have a property that you don't have, that securities fraud, and that could really ruin your career and put you at risk. And one of the reasons why people will set up corporations or LLCs is to shield themselves from that kind of liability. So if you have your own personal assets and you're out there committing, doing irresponsible things like accepting money without the rights or purporting to have your ducks in a row but not being able to get distribution because you don't, you haven't done an investigation on the chain of title, and you haven't asked for the appropriate reps and warranties from your writer, you're really putting yourself at risk. There are many horror stories that I can tell you about, but you probably know a few of them already. The point is that this is a very legal intensive process. And if you wing it, you really do it at your own risk and peril, right? So D is duration, and that is essentially what we're talking about with the term of an agreement. First term would be your option agreement, which if it's a free option or a nominal sum like $10, very short term, like 6 months. A more conventional term is a year to 18 months, and it's very common to have at least one extension period with a payment for each extension. The first one that would get applied to the purchase price, the second one that typically does not get applied to the purchase price. So that's your C card. You can apply it to virtually any contract in a film, because it covers all the essential deal points. It's a nice lens through which you can understand the deal points. So you get a contract, you don't have your lawyer standing next to you, but you just want to read it through and understand it. Take out that C card. Look at the compensation. Where's the flow of money? Who's getting paid? When are they getting paid? How are they getting paid? Is the payment based on success? How much is upfront? How much is contingent on performance? Are there bonuses based on the success? For example, if you get an Independent Spirit Award nomination, there are contracts that allow for an additional payment, a bonus payment where that happens, or an Academy Award nomination or a Golden Globe nomination. So compensation can be upfront, it can be contingent, and based on an event, it can be deferred as part of that. But if you are a rights holder, you want to get that money up front. If you're a producer, you want to reserve as much money, that gunpowder as much as possible. You want to save that for what's on the screen. So there's some tension there. In credit, we've discussed, it's a part of almost any creative agreement that you're going to see in a film. Approvals, you now know as a producer that you want to hold those producer cards, those approval cards as much as possible. You do not want your talent and other creative participants holding you up so that you can't exploit the work because they don't like it. It doesn't work for them. The one place where their approvals are really appropriate is where you're out there promoting their image. They will have a right to some approvals over that. The rights acquired is key. What's the scope of those rights? If you have ambitions of turning this project into a franchise, you really need a broad array of rights. What you don't want to do is just get a narrow set. You blow it up, it's a very successful project, and then you have to go back to the rights holder. Well, they have no obligation to you unless you've negotiated that. Maybe it's a right of first refusal. Maybe it's the last matching right. But if you've spent good money and the project is now successful, you can rest assured that others will find a way to that property holder and will try and leverage your success. So you probably want to find a way to have a subsequent production rights. And then finally is the term, is how long. One of the interesting things to consider for term is if you are a writer and you've given a producer the exclusive rights to develop